The air within the grand synod of Othries tasted of ozone and ancient dust, a sensory reminder of the millennia of stagnant bureaucracy that suffocated the galaxy. It was a colossal chamber, shaped like an inverted amphitheater carved from the living obsidian of a dead moon, where the representatives of 1,000 star nations gathered to debate the fate of the lesser, the weaker, and the forgotten. Above, the transparent dome revealed the swirling, bruised purple of the nebula of lost souls, casting a sickly, funereal light upon the proceedings. At the center of the pit, floating on a gravity-nullified dais, stood High Exarch Vrax of the Varaxian Dominion. He was a towering construct of biological chitin and cybernetic augmentation, a living weapon of a species that had long ago decided that empathy was an evolutionary dead end. His multifaceted eyes, glowing with the crimson hue of predatory targeting sensors, swept across the tiered rows of the assembly, daring anyone to speak against his proclamation. The silence that held the chamber was not one of respect, but of a primal, vibrating fear, the kind that prey feels when the predator has finally stopped stalking and decided to strike. Vrax's voice did not merely travel through the air. It was amplified by the subsonic emitters embedded in his carapace, vibrating in the chest cavities of every biological entity present. He spoke of the natural order, a doctrine the Varaxians had weaponized to justify their endless expansion. He gestured with a clawed manipulator towards the shivering form of Speaker Lanius, the representative of the Ethelgard. The Ethelgard were a species of fragile, crystalline beauty, entities of light and resonance who communicated through harmonics and built great spires of singing glass. They possessed no warships, no planetary shielding, and no concept of violence. They were the artists of the sector, the keepers of history, and in the eyes of the Varaxian Dominion they were nothing more than targets, vulnerable, soft, and ripe for harvest. Vrax declared that the Ethelgard sector, rich in rare isotopes and psionic reactive crystals, was wasted on a species that could not defend it. Under Article 77 of the Galactic Charter, a law written by the strong to oppress the weak, he formally claimed their systems as a protectorate of the Dominion. It was a polite word for slavery. The assembly shifted uncomfortably. The Hydraxian delegation rippled their gilfrills in distress but remained silent. The cybermonks of the Krell Collective processed the data and found the probability of successful intervention to be statistically insignificant, so they too remained silent. All eyes turned briefly to the shadowed alcove near the upper rim, where the newest members of the council sat, the humans. They were an enigma to the older races, a species that had arrived on the galactic stage with quiet engines and muted transmissions. They did not bluster, they did not threaten. They wore simple, utilitarian uniforms of gray and navy, lacking the ornate ceremonial armor of the warrior races or the flowing silk robes of the diplomatic castes. Their representative, Ambassador Thorn, sat with a stillness that Vrax found irritating. The humans were small, soft-skinned, lacking natural weapons or plating. They built hospitals before they built fortresses. They traded in medical technology and agricultural terraforming, not plasma cannons. To the Varaxians, humanity was merely another flavor of weakness, perhaps a future meal once the Ethelgard were digested. Vrax sneered, his mandibles clicking together with the sound of cracking bone. He challenged the silence, demanding if any species dared to contest the claim. He waited, letting the fear marinate, savoring the scent of terror pheromones that wafted from the lower tiers. When no voice rose to challenge him, he declared the motion passed by default of cowardice. The Ethelgard speaker, Lanius, let out a sound like shattering glass, a mournful harmony of despair that echoed off the obsidian walls. It was the sound of a civilization realizing its extinction was not only imminent but legally sanctioned by the very body sworn to uphold peace. Vrax turned his back on the weeping crystal being, his cape of woven steel trailing behind him, and signaled his fleet. The blockade was already in place. The invasion would not be a war, it would be a processing event. The Varaxian heavily armored dreadnoughts, ships the size of cities designed to crack planetary crusts, were already powering their weapons in the high orbit of the Ethelgard homeworld, Ethelos. But as the holographic displays in the center of the chamber flared to life, showing the live feed of the Ethelgard system, a ripple of confusion moved through the assembly. The Varaxian fleet, a swarm of jagged black metal hulls bristling with kinetic accelerators, was not firing. They were turning. Their formation, usually a perfect sphere of An. Annihilation was breaking apart, the ship scattering like startled fish. Ambassador Thorn, the human who had sat motionless for hours, finally moved. He did not stand up in a rage, he did not shout. He simply tapped a command into the console before him. The lights in the Grand Synod dimmed, and the central holographic projector was overridden. The image of the Varaxian fleet was replaced by a tactical plot of the entire sector. A new signal had appeared on the edge of the Ethelgard system. It was not a single warp signature, nor a fleet in the traditional sense. It was a distortion of space-time so massive that the sensors of the Council were registering it as a gravitational anomaly. Vrax spun around, his optical sensors widening. He demanded to know what trickery this was, accusing the Ethelgard of hiring mercenaries, perhaps the lawless raiders of the Outer Rim. But the signature was too clean, too massive, and too disciplined for pirates. From the depths of the slipspace rupture, the human fleet emerged. They did not arrive with the thunderous roar of displacement that characterized Varaxian drives, nor the tearing screech of the Krell warp gates. They arrived in silence, a sudden, absolute presence where previously there had been nothing. These were not the small trade ships or the light cruisers the galaxy had seen patrolling Earth's trade routes. These were leviathans, hulls of matte black composite that seemed to drink the starlight, smooth and featureless save for the running lights that pulsed with a slow, heartbeat rhythm. They did not bear the jagged spikes of intimidation or the glowing nacelles of arrogance. They were geometric perfection, monoliths of war designed by a species that treated violence not as a sport, but as a regrettable, mathematical necessity. The sheer scale of the human arrival sent a shockwave through the Grand Synod. The sensors could not count them. The telemetry simply reported a wall of mass blocking the vector between the Varaxian fleet and the planet Ethelos. It was a physical shield made of millions of tons of starship alloy. Vrax roared at the human alcove, demanding an explanation for this violation of the non-interference protocols. He accused Earth of declaring war. Ambassador Thorn stood up then. He adjusted the cuffs of his uniform, his face an impassive mask of calm determination. He spoke into the center of the room, his voice unamplified yet carrying a weight that silenced the ambient hum of the machinery. He stated that humanity was not declaring war. War implied a conflict between two valid political entities over resources or ideology. This, Thorn explained, was a police action. He cited a frantic, obscure subsection of the Galactic Charter, one that hadn't been invoked in 10,000 years. The Defense of the Defenseless clause, which mandated that if the Council failed to protect a member species from genocide, any capable power was authorized to intervene with extreme prejudice. Vrax laughed, a harsh, grinding sound. He mocked the human fleet, calling them fools for bringing transport ships to a slaughter. He believed the smooth human vessels were soft, lacking the heavy armor of the Dominion's dreadnoughts. He commanded his fleet admiral, via a link audible to the entire chamber, to fire a warning salvo. He wanted to see the human ships burn. He wanted to see the resolve of these upstarts melt away under the fury of Varaxian plasma. On the holographic display, the lead Varaxian super-dreadnought, the Devourer of Suns, pivoted its massive spinal cannon toward the nearest human vessel. The weapon, capable of shattering a moon, glowed with the blinding white light of contained solar fury. The beam lashed out, a spear of energy that crossed the vacuum in an instant, striking the human ship dead center. The Council held its breath. The Ethelgard wept. Vrax grinned behind his mandibles. The light cleared. The human ship remained. It had not moved. It had not buckled. There was no debris, no venting atmosphere. Instead, a shimmering, translucent honeycomb of golden light faded into view around the hull, a dispersion field of such density that it had simply absorbed the energy, fed it into capacitors, and neutralized the thermal impact. The human ship, identified on the sensors as the UNS Aegis, did not fire back. It simply hailed the Varaxian vessel. The voice of the human captain echoed through the Grand Synod, broadcast by Thorn. It was a woman's voice, cool, professional, sounding like a teacher correcting a student. She informed the Varaxian vessel that their weapons discharge had been registered as a Class A hostile act, and she requested they power down their offensive systems and prepare for boarding and inspection. Vrax went apoplectic. The arrogance, to be shot at by a planet killer and then ask the shooter to surrender. He screamed for his fleet to open fire, all weapons, all batteries. The space around Ethelos erupted into a firest. Thousands of Varaxian warships unleashed a torrent of missiles, plasma bolts, and kinetic slugs. The sheer volume of fire turned the void into a blinding nebula of violence. The human fleet vanished behind a curtain of explosions. The Synod watched, many believing the humans had been annihilated by sheer weight of fire. No shield could withstand that much focused entropy. But as the barrage faded, the sensor readings stabilized. The human fleet was still there. They had advanced. They were now intermingled with the Varaxian formation. And then the humans acted. They did not use crude explosives. They did not spray plasma wildly. They used gravity. The human warships, utilizing technology the galaxy had only theorized about, projected focused gravity wells. They didn't target the Varaxian ships' hulls. They targeted their engines. In the silence of the vacuum, the brutal efficiency of Earth's fleet was revealed. Invisible shears of gravitational force severed the drive nacelles of the Varaxian dreadnoughts. Massive capital ships suddenly found themselves spinning uncontrollably as their own artificial gravity turned against them. The humans were surgically dismantling the enemy fleet. It was not a battle, it was a dissection. On the screen, one of the human cruisers drifted alongside the Devourer of Suns. Compared to the jagged, expansive bulk of the alien ship, the human vessel looked like a sleek dagger. A series of thumping vibrations resonated through the audio pickups, boarding torpedoes. The humans were not just destroying the ships, they were taking them. They were capturing the aggressors. Back in the Synod, the atmosphere had shifted from fear to a stunned, terrified awe. The Varaxians were the bullies of the sector, the apex predators, and they were being taken apart by a species that refused to shout. Vrax was trembling, his cybernetics sparking with the feedback of his skyrocketing stress levels. He turned to Thorn, his voice losing its subsonic dominance, pitching up into a screech. He demanded to know what the humans were, who they really were. Thorn looked at the Varaxian High Exarch with eyes that held the weight of a history soaked in blood, blood that humanity had spent centuries trying to wash off. He stepped down from his alcove, walking slowly toward the center of the pit. The other delegates parted for him, shrinking away from the representative of the species that commanded gravity itself. Thorn spoke, and this time he addressed the entire council. He told them that for centuries, humanity had looked at the stars and wondered if they were alone. When they finally broke the light barrier and met the galaxy, they were disappointed. They found empires built on slavery, councils driven by greed, and a strong eat-sweet philosophy that humanity had outgrown in its own iron ages. He explained that Earth had a history of monsters. They had been their own predators. They had fought wars of extermination against themselves, burned their own cities, and scarred their own planet. They knew exactly what Vrax was because they used to be him. And because of that, they had made a vow when they unified. A vow that the strong exist only to protect the weak. That power is a burden, not a privilege. "You mistook our politeness for weakness," Thorn said, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. "You mistook our silence for fear. You thought because we did not brandish weapons, we did not have them." On the holographic display, the battle was ending. The Varaxian fleet was drifting, powered down, their weapon systems fused by precision-localized EMP bursts. The Ethelgard planet below was untouched. Not a single piece of debris had fallen into its atmosphere. The human fleet held position, a wall of silent guardians. "The vulnerable were your targets," Thorn continued, stopping directly in front of Vrax, looking up at the towering alien. "And that is why you lost. We do not fight for territory. We do not fight for glory. We fight for them. And when we fight for the defenseless, we do not miss and we do not fail." Vrax, cornered and humiliated, tried one last desperate gambit. He activated the hidden localized singularity bomb embedded in his chest armor, a suicide device meant to take the entire council with him rather than face defeat. The energy signature flared on the sensors. The other delegates screamed, but Thorn did not flinch. Before Vrax could trigger the detonation, a beam of translucent blue light materialized from the ceiling, teleportation technology another secret Earth had kept. In a millisecond, Vrax was gone. He reappeared on the screen, floating in the vacuum of space, miles away from the station, inside a containment field generated by one of the human ships. The bomb detonated, a silent puff of fire quickly extinguished by the lack of oxygen, harmlessly contained. The council was frozen. Thorn adjusted his cuffs again, turned to the weeping Ethelgard speaker, and furred a hand, a gesture of mammalian comfort that transcended species barriers. "The Ethelgard are under the protection of the Terran Coalition," Thorn announced calmly. "As are any species who finds themselves targeted by the predatory ambitions of the Dominion. We are open to trade. We are open to dialogue. But know this, if you target the innocent, you target us. And we are very, very good at war." The narrative shifts now, moving away from the political theater of the Synod to the bridge of the UNS Aegis. Admiral Alina Vance stood watching the tactical plot. The debris field was minimal thanks to their precision. Her crew worked with a quiet, synchronized efficiency. There were no cheers, no high fives. This was a job. They were the galaxy's janitors, cleaning up the messes left by immature civilizations. Vance looked at the viewport, where the crystalline spires of Ethelos glittered in the starlight below. She felt the heavy burden of what they had just revealed. Humanity had tried to stay in the background, to be the quiet neighbor. They knew that revealing their true military capabilities would change everything. They would no longer be ignored, they would be feared, and fear was a dangerous currency. Her second-in-command, Commander Riker, approached. He was a man of few words, a veteran of the Jovian Wars. He handed her a datapad. "Diplomatic channels are flooded, Admiral. Everyone wants to know who we are. The Krell Collective is asking for our physics data. The Hydraxian monarchy wants a non-aggression pact, and the Varaxian homeworld has gone dark. Total communications blackout." Vance nodded. "They're regrouping. Vrax was just a symptom. The Dominion is a cancer. They won't stop because of one bloody nose." "We didn't just give them a bloody nose, ma'am," Riker noted, glancing at the drifting hulks of the enemy fleet. "We broke their jaw." "It will heal," Vance said grimly. "And when it does, they'll come back with something worse. Prepare the fleet for Phase 2. We need to establish a perimeter around the Ethelgard sector and send a message to Earth Command. Tell them the masquerade is over. The galaxy knows." The story then descends into the perspective of an alien engineer, Xyler, a Varaxian serving on one of the disabled dreadnoughts. The ship was dark, the air growing stale. Xyler was terrified. The propaganda had told him humans were soft, hairless apes who would flee at the first sight of a warrior. But he had watched from his engineering console as his ship's main drive was sliced off by invisible hands. He had seen the human boarding parties move through the corridors. They were terrifying. Clad in powered armor that looked like nightly plate mail made of void metal, they moved with a fluid, terrifying speed. They didn't kill indiscriminately. They stunned. They restrained. They used flashbangs and neural disruptors. It was almost more insulting than being killed. It showed they didn't even consider the Varaxians enough of a threat to use lethal force. Xyler hid in a maintenance crawl space, clutching a plasma wrench. He heard the heavy boots of the humans clamping onto the deck plating. They were communicating in a language of sharp, clipped consonants. One of the humans stopped right outside his hatch. Xyler held his breath, his heart's pounding against his ribs. The hatch was ripped open with mechanical ease. A human stood there, the visor of their helmet glowing a soft blue. Xyler raised the wrench, a futile gesture. The human didn't shoot. The external speakers of the armor clicked. "Drop it," the voice said, translated by Xyler's universal translator. It wasn't a growl, it was a command. Xyler dropped the wrench. The human reached in, grabbed him by the carapace, and hauled him out. Xyler expected execution. Instead, the human slapped a biomonitor on his chest, checked the reading, and pointed down the hall. "Prisoner processing is in the port hangar. Medical aid is available if you are injured. Go." Xyler stared. "Why?" he stammered. "Why do you not kill? We would have killed you." The human paused, looking down at the shivering alien. The visor polarized, revealing the face of a young man, tired but hard-eyed. "Because we aren't you," the human said, "and we don't want to be." This interaction, repeated across thousands of ships, began to sow the seeds of a cultural collapse within the Varaxian ranks. They were prepared for death. They were prepared for torture. They were not prepared for mercy. It broke their worldview. If the strong did not eat the weak, if the conqueror did not enslave the conquered, then the entire foundation of their society was a lie. As the weeks passed, the situation in the sector stabilized, but the tension shifted. The initial awe of the human intervention began to curdle into suspicion among the other races. The Council, now freed from Varaxian bullying, began to look at the Terran coalition with a new kind of wariness. If humans could disable the Dominion so easily, what could they do to the rest of them? Act 2 of the narrative delves deep into this diplomatic friction. Ambassador Thorne found himself fighting a different kind of war in the council chambers, a war of words and philosophies. He had to convince a paranoid galaxy that humanity's strength was a shield, not a sword. He invited delegations to inspect the human ships, to visit the colony worlds where humans and aliens lived side by side. During one such tour on the UNS Aegis, the Ethelgard speaker Lanius was shown the ship's library. It was a physical room filled with books, paper books, a rarity in the galaxy. Lanius touched the spine of an ancient text. "You keep the past," Lanius hummed, his light pulsing with curiosity. "Most races delete what is inefficient." "We forget nothing," Thorne said, standing beside him. "We keep the memory of our mistakes so we don't repeat them. This book, it is about a war we fought against ourselves. Millions died, over ideology, over land. It reminds us that the monster is always inside us, waiting to be let out. Lanius turned his crystal face to Thorn. Is that why you defend us, to keep your monster in a cage? Partly, Thorn admitted. And partly because we see ourselves in you. We were once the vulnerable ones. We looked at the sky and feared what might come down. We decided that if we ever made it to the stars, we would be the nightmare that fights other nightmares. But the nightmare was not over. Deep in the heart of the Varaxian Dominion, the humiliation of the defeat at Ethelos had triggered a radical shift. The old High Exarchs were overthrown in a bloody coup by a fanatical sect known as the Ascended. They believed that biology itself was the weakness. They began to merge themselves with forbidden tech, ancient, unstable artifacts found in the dead zones of the galaxy, technology left behind by the precursors, the ones who came before. Intelligence reports began to reach Admiral Vance. Entire systems in the Dominion were going silent, not just communications but life signs. The stars themselves seemed to be dimming in that sector. The humans sent stealth probes, small slip-space drones that could bypass sensors. The telemetry they returned was horrific. The Varaxians were harvesting their own population, feeding them into massive biomechanical foundries to build a new class of ship. These weren't ships of metal. They were ships of flesh and dark matter, abominations that defied physics. The ascended Varaxians had stopped caring about conquest. They wanted annihilation. They viewed the human concept of mercy as a virus that had to be purged from the galaxy. They prepared a crusade, a final push to wipe out the Terran coalition and the Ethelgard, and then the rest of the galaxy. The narrative builds to the second great conflict. This time the humans could not rely on surprise or police tactics. This was total war. The Varaxian armada that emerged from the dark space was a nightmare. Their ships screamed psychically, projecting waves of madness into the minds of the crews they faced. The Ethelgard, sensitive to psionics, began to shatter, their crystalline bodies cracking under the psychic assault. The human fleet met them in the nebula between the sectors, the battle of the bleeding stars. It was a chaotic, brutal engagement. The gravity weapons of the humans were less effective against the biological hulls of the ascended ships, which healed and regenerated. The humans had to adapt. They switched to kinetic bombardment, railguns accelerating tungsten slugs to a significant fraction of light speed. Admiral Vance commanded the battle from the center of the formation. Her ship shook violently as psionic screams battered the hull's psychic shielding, another human innovation developed from studying the Ethelgard. "Hold the line," she ordered. "Do not let them pass. If they break through, Ethelos dies." The battle raged for days. The humans took heavy losses. The sleek black ships were torn apart by organic tentacles and acid plasma, but they did not break. The no-mercy doctrine shifted. It was no longer about dismantling the enemy. It was about extermination of a threat that could not be reasoned with. The humans unleashed their reserve weaponry, antimatter torpedoes that erased matter from existence. In the midst of the chaos, a realization struck the Ethelgard speaker, Lanius, who was aboard the flagship. He realized the Varaxian screams were not just noise. They were a corrupted harmony. They were trying to sing the universe into unmaking. Lanius realized that the Ethelgard were not just victims. They were the counter-frequency. Lanius rushed to the bridge. "Admiral, we can stop them, but we need to be amplified. We need your comms array." Vance didn't hesitate. She trusted the alien. "Give him the fleet channel, link it to every emitter we have." Lanius began to sing. It wasn't a song of despair this time. It was a song of order, of structure, of crystalline perfection. Amplified by the Terran technology, the song blasted across the vacuum, drowning out the chaotic screams of the Varaxians. The effect was immediate. The biological ships of the enemy began to convulse. The dark matter binding them destabilized. The harmony of the Ethelgard, backed by the raw power of human fusion reactors, shattered the command control of the Ascended. Seizing the moment, Vance ordered the final strike. The human fleet, battered and bleeding, formed a spearhead. They drove straight into the heart of the Varaxian formation, delivering a payload of tectonic-busting nukes directly into the enemy flagship. The explosion was like a new star being born. The Varaxian fleet crumbled, their hive mind severed by the Ethelgard song and the human fire. The aftermath was solemn. The debris field was a graveyard of millions, but the galaxy was safe. The alliance between the Terran coalition and the Ethelgard was sealed in blood and song. However, the story does not end there. Act 3 introduces the larger twist, the philosophical crescendo. As the fleets repaired and the galaxy celebrated the victory, the humans found something in the wreckage of the ascended flagship. A data core, ancient and not of Varaxian origin. It was the source of the technology they had used. The humans cracked the code. It was a warning. The Varaxians hadn't just gone crazy. They had been running. The ascended leaders had seen something coming from the intergalactic void, a shadow that consumed galaxies. They had tried to turn their species into monsters to survive it, believing that only the cruelest, most ruthless forms of life could withstand the oncoming storm. Thorn brought this information to the Grand Synod. The mood was different now. The other races looked at the humans not with suspicion, but with a desperate hope. They realized that the conflict between the Dominion and the Coalition was just a skirmish before the real war. Thorn stood before the council again. "We thought we were fighting for the Ethelgard," he said, his voice heavy. "We thought we were fighting to protect the weak, but the truth is we are all the weak now. What is coming? It doesn't care about politics or borders. It is a great filter, and we are next." The twist revealed that humanity's rapid advancement, their obsession with defense, their frantic colonization was because they already knew. Their own ancient history, the precursors found on Mars, had warned them. Humanity had been preparing for the Great Silence for centuries. That was why they were so powerful. That was why they were so serious. They weren't building an empire. They were building a bunker for the entire galaxy. The ending is a cinematic montage of unity. No longer divided by petty squabbles, the galaxy begins to mobilize under human guidance. The Ethelgard teach the other races how to harmonize their minds. The Krell Collective shares their processing power. The Hydraxian fleets merge with the Terran armadas. The final scene takes place on the bridge of a new ship, the UNS Unity, a vessel built by a dozen species working together. Admiral Vance, now older, scarred, looks out at the edge of the galaxy. The stars there are disappearing, one by one, blotted out by an encroaching darkness. She isn't afraid. She looks at her crew, a human helm officer, an Ethelgard comms specialist, a Krell tactical officer, and even a Varaxian defector at the engineering station. "Target the darkness," Vance whispers. The fleet, a unified constellation of light against the infinite night, powers up. The vulnerable were the targets, yes, but the vulnerable had found each other. They had found their shields, and as the story closes, the narration reflects on the nature of humanity. They were the youngest, the most volatile, the most paradoxical of species. They carried the capacity for great evil and great good in the same heartbeat. But when the sky went dark, they did not hide. They lit a fire, and they dared the universe to try and blow it out. The screen fades to black on the image of the combined fleet moving into the unknown, not as conquerors, but as the guardians of existence. The Earth's fleet showed no mercy to the aggressors, so that they could show infinite mercy to the survivors. The cycle of predator and prey was broken, replaced by the line of the shield. Narrative ends. The following is the full-length story generation based on the structure and thought process above. The silence within the high conclave of the galactic spur was not peaceful. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a predator holding its breath before the kill. The chamber itself was an architectural marvel of the elder races, a vast, hollowed-out geode suspended in the gravitational null zone of the Othri system. The walls, towering kilometers high, were lined with the viewing pods of 1,000 species, a emerging mosaic of bioluminescent eyes, sensory stalks, and cybernetic lenses. But for all the diversity of life gathered here, only one voice mattered today. It was the voice of High Exarch Zarkin of the Varaxian Dominion, and it boomed through the acoustic dampeners with the grinding resonance of tectonic plates shifting. Zarkin stood at the center of the obsidian dais, a creature of nightmare made manifest, a 10-foot tower of chitinous armor, pulsing veins of violet ichor, and multifaceted eyes that burned with a cold, industrial malice. He did not speak to the assembly, he lectured them. He did not propose motions, he dictated reality. "The weak exist to sustain the strong," Zarkin roared, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that sent shivers through the ethereally delicate representatives of the Ethelgard. "It is the first law of thermodynamics applied to biology. Entropy demands consumption. Expansion demands fuel. The Ethelgard sector is stagnant. They build art while the universe demands industry. They sing to crystals while the Dominion forges steel. Their refusal to militarize is not a virtue. It is an insult to the harshness of existence. Therefore, by the right of provenance, the Dominion claims their systems. Their resources are ours. Their labor is ours. Their lives are forfeit. The Ethelgard representative, Speaker Alara, trembled in her pod. She was a being of light and silica, a humanoid structure of translucent, singing glass. Her people had never fired a weapon in anger in 10,000 years of history. They were the philosophers of the spur, the keepers of the deep archives, the weavers of light. To them, war was a concept as alien as breathing water. Alara looked around the vast chamber, her internal light pulsing with a erratic, frantic blue of distress. She looked to the Krell collective, but the machine monks merely calculated the odds and found the Ethelgard's survival probability to be 0. They remained silent. She looked to the Hydraxian warlords, but they averted their gaze, unwilling to provoke the Varaxian war machine. The galaxy was tired. The galaxy was afraid. The Dominion had the largest fleet, the cruelest soldiers, and the absolute will to use them. "Is there no one?" Alara's voice chimed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm, amplified by the translator but losing none of its heartbreaking fragility. "Is there no law, no mercy? We have harmed no one. We have only added beauty to the void. Will you let us be erased?" Zarkin laughed, a wet, tearing sound. "Mercy is a fairy tale told by prey to delay the inevitable. Look around you, little glass thing. No one will speak for you. They know the price of defiance." It was then that the air in the chamber shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a change in pressure, a sudden drop in the ambient temperature that made the condensation form on the viewing glass of the pods. From the shadowed alcove on the highest tier, a section reserved for the minor non-aligned polities, a single figure stood up. The species was new to the conclave, having only made contact 50 standard cycles ago. They were bipedal, soft-skinned, lacking claws, carapaces, or natural toxins. They called themselves humans. They were known as traders, diligent engineers, and somewhat reserved diplomats. They were considered unremarkable, a Tier 4 civilization by the Galactic standard, barely worth the Dominion's notice. The human representative, Ambassador Elias Thorne, adjusted the collar of his charcoal-gray dress uniform. He was an older male, with hair the color of iron filings and eyes that seemed to hold a strange, dull flatness, like the surface of a deep ocean that concealed leviathans beneath. He did not shout. He did not activate the sonic amplifiers. He simply tapped his microphone, and the calm, measured sound of his voice cut through Zarkin's laughter like a scalpel. "The Terran Coalition objects," Thorne said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a crowd watching a child step onto a fusion reactor track. Zarkin turned his massive head slowly, his compound eyes narrowing as he zoomed in on the small, fragile mammal standing in the upper tier. "Objects," Zarkin mocked, the word dripping with disdain. "The Terran Coalition, you are barely a fledged species, you have no fleets, you have no history of conquest. You are merchants of grain and medicine, you object. And what will you do, human? Sanction us. Refuse to sell us your little data pads." Thorne did not smile. He did not frown. His face remained a mask of polite, bureaucratic indifference. "We do not object to the trade of resources, High Exarch. We object to the genocide of a sentient species. We invoke Article 9 of the Founding Charter, the right of existence." "The Charter is dead," Zarkin bellowed, slamming a fist onto the dais, cracking the stone. "Power is the only law. If you wish to debate, bring warships, not lawyers, but you have none. Your fleet is a call. CDON of cargo haulers and exploration vessels. Stand down, human, or your world will be next on the menu after we finish digesting the glass people." Thorne looked down at his datapad, tapped a few keys, and then looked back up at the giant alien. "Noted," he said softly. "The Dominion has formally threatened the Terran Coalition. Diplomatic resolution is now considered failed. The Coalition declares the Ethelgard sector a protected zone. Any military asset crossing the heliopause of the Ethelgard system will be considered hostile and neutralized." The laughter from the Varaxian delegation was deafening. It was the laughter of wolves looking at a sheep that had decided to baa aggressively. Zarkin signaled his admirals in orbit. "Let the galaxy see what happens to those who bluff the Dominion. Begin the invasion, and if any human ships get in the way, vaporize them." The scene shifted from the sterile politics of the conclave to the terrifying reality of the Ethelgard homeworld, Ethelos. The planet was a jewel of biology and geology, a world where the cities were grown from crystal and coral, singing in harmony with the planet's magnetic field. But now, the sky was darkening, not from clouds, but from the shadow of the Varaxian armada. Thousands of ships, jagged black knives of war, descended from the upper atmosphere. They were ugly, brutal things, leaking radiation and smog, designed to intimidate as much as to destroy. Down on the surface, the Ethelgard populace panicked. They had no bunkers. They had no weapons factories. They gathered in their great plazas, holding hands, their bodies glowing with a collective pulse of terror. They looked up as the first orbital bombardment cannons began to charge. The sky turned a sickly green as the plasma accumulators reached critical mass. This was the end. The history of their people, their art, their songs, all of it would be turned to glass and ash in the next few minutes. High above, aboard the Varaxian flagship Worldbreaker, Fleetmaster Krall watched the targeting telemetry. He smirked. Target the primary population centers. Maximum yield. Let's make sure the humans are watching. He pressed the firing stud. The weapons fired. Beams of coherent plasma, hot enough to boil oceans, streaked down toward the fragile cities. But they never hit the ground. At the edge of the atmosphere, precisely calculated to the millimeter, space itself seemed to fold. A shimmering, hexagonal grid of golden light materialized out of nowhere, forming a planetary dome of impossible size. The plasma beams struck the barrier and diffused, splashing harmlessly like water against a pane of glass. The sky of Ethelos did not burn. It rippled with auroras of dispersed energy. Krall blinked at his sensors. Shield failure, did we miss? Negative, Fleetmaster, his tactical officer shrieked, his voice rising in panic. Energy absorption detected, massive unexpected mass signatures appearing in high orbit. They are everywhere. The space around Ethelos, previously empty save for the Varaxian fleet, suddenly tore open. These were not the messy, violent warp tiers of the Dominion drives. These were silent, surgical incisions in reality. From the tier in spacetime, the Terran fleet emerged, and the galaxy gasped. These were not the cargo haulers Zarkin had mocked. These were monsters. Leviathans of matte black composite, hull plates capable of absorbing radar and light alike. They were sleek, angular, and bristling with technology that the sensor arrays of the Varaxians couldn't even classify. The smallest of the human escorts was larger than a Varaxian cruiser. The human dreadnoughts were the size of small moons. They didn't have the jagged, aggressive aesthetics of the aliens. They had the cold, terrifying symmetry of a predator that has evolved past the need to look scary. The flagship of the human fleet, the UNS Nemesis, drifted into position directly between the Varaxian armada and the planet. It was a spearhead of darkness, 5 kilometers long. Its engines didn't roar. They hummed with the terrifying basso profondo of contained gravitational singularities. Aboard the Nemesis, Admiral Sarah Vance stood on the bridge. She was not a diplomat like Thorne. She was a soldier of the Terran Deep Guard, a veteran of the Trans-Jovian conflicts. She wore a simple black uniform unadorned by medals. The humans didn't wear their history on their chests. They carried it in their eyes. "Open a channel to the alien fleet," Vance ordered. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "Channel open, Admiral. Broad spectrum. The whole system can hear you." Vance looked at the tactical display. The Varaxian ships were scrambling, their formations breaking in confusion. "This is Admiral Vance of the Terran Coalition Navy," she said. "You have fired upon a protected world. You have ignored diplomatic warnings. You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons, lower your shields, and prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply, we will not ask again." On the Worldbreaker, Fleetmaster Krall recovered from his shock. Fury replaced fear. "They are bluffing. No new species has this kind of tonnage. It's a hologram. Fire. All batteries fire at that black ship." The Varaxian fleet unleashed hell. Thousands of missiles, millions of kinetic rounds, and enough directed energy to sterilize a star system poured into the Nemesis. Vance didn't even blink. "Point defense, pattern delta. Intercept only. Let the energy weapons hit the dispersion field. We need the data on their yield." The human ship vanished in a fireball. For a solid minute, the Varaxians poured fire into the cloud of expanding gas. Krall laughed. "See, they burn like the rest." But as the fire faded, the Nemesis emerged. Its shields flared a bright, defiant gold for a microsecond before settling back into invisibility. The hull was unscratched. The thermal energy had been absorbed, fed into the ship's capacitors. "Yield analysis complete," the ship's AI announced coolly. "Enemy weapon efficiency 12%, threat level negligible." Vance nodded. "Time's up, disable them. No kills if we can avoid it. We're not butchers. Target their drives and weapon ports. Execute Solution 01. The human fleet did not fire back with lasers or plasma. They fired invisible beams of focused gravity. Across the Varaxian formation, the effects were instantaneous and catastrophic. The nacelles of the alien destroyers were suddenly subjected to tidal forces of 100,000 GS. Metal screamed and sheared. Engines were ripped cleanly off hulls. Weapon barrels were crushed flat by localized gravity wells. It was surgical, it was precise, it was terrifyingly efficient. The humans were disarming the Varaxians like a parent taking a knife away from a toddler. Krall watched in horror as his fleet was dismantled around him. His own ship lurched as the main drive was crushed into a ball of super-dense scrap metal. "Ram them!" he screamed. "Ram the flagship!" The World Breaker, crippled and burning, used its maneuvering thrusters to lurch toward the Nemesis. It was a suicide run. Vance watched the behemoth approach. "Tractor beam, lock it down." The Nemesis projected a beam of blue-white light. It struck the Varaxian ship and stopped it dead in the void. A ship of 10 million tons, moving at combat speed, was halted instantly, held in place by the godlike grip of the human vessel. "Boarding parties," Vance said. "Secure the bridge, take the command crew into custody. If they resist, neutralize them." The scene cuts to the interior of the World Breaker. Krall and his guards, giant insected warriors armed with plasma rifles, waited at the airlock. They were ready to die fighting. They expected a firefight. The airlock blew, but no soldiers rushed in. Instead, small, spherical drones floated into the room. They emitted a high-pitched pulse. Krall's vision blurred. His knees gave way, neural disruptors. The Varaxians collapsed, paralyzed but conscious. Then the humans entered. They wore powered armor that looked like it was woven from shadow and light, faceless and silent. They stepped over the paralyzed warriors, checking vitals, securing weapons. One of the humans, a commander with a red stripe on his armor, knelt by Krall. Krall, unable to move his body but able to speak, hissed, "Kill me, finish it." The human helm polarized, revealing a human face. "We don't kill prisoners," the human said. "You're going to stand trial. You're going to answer for every world you burned." "Why?" Krall spat. "We are the strong. You beat us. By the law of the galaxy, you should eat us." The human stood up, looking around the bridge of the conquered ship. "We aren't from this galaxy's school of thought. Where we come from, the strong don't eat the weak. The strong protect the weak. That's the only reason to be strong." Back in the High Conclave, the live feed from the Ethelos system played on the central screen. The chamber was silent. Zarkin, the High Exarch, stared at the image of his invincible fleet drifting, broken and captured, around the undamaged world of the Ethelgard. Ambassador Thorn was still standing in his alcove. He hadn't moved. He looked down at Zarkin. "The Ethelgard are now under the protection of Earth," Thorn said. "As are the Hydraxian, the Krell, and any other species that requests it. The Dominion's reign of terror is over. We are seizing your assets to pay for reparations." Zarkin stammered, his arrogance shattered. Who are you people? You act like monks but fight like demons." Thorn leaned forward, his hands resting on the railing. "We are humanity, and we have spent a very long time learning how to not destroy ourselves. You thought we were weak because we were peaceful. You forgot that peace is not the absence of violence. Peace is the control of violence, and we are very, very controlled." The aftermath of the Battle of Ethelos sent Hawkwaves through the galaxy. The Varaxian Dominion didn't just collapse, it imploded culturally. The revelation that their military superiority was a lie and that a soft species had humiliated them without even resorting to mass slaughter broke the psychological hold the Exarchs had on their people. Revolutions sprang up on Varaxian colony worlds. Slave races rose up. But for the humans, this was only the beginning. They knew that defeating a bully was easy, building a peace was hard. Act 2 opens months later. The UNS Nemesis is docked at the Ethelgard orbital ring. Human engineers are working alongside crystalline Ethelgard artisans, repairing the damage to the satellites. The cultural exchange is in full swing. The Ethelgard are fascinated by humans. They find human duality confusing, how a species can write poetry about flowers and also design a railgun that can crack a continent. Speaker Alara walks with Admiral Vance through the corridors of the Nemesis. "Your people are sad," Alara observed, her light pulsing a soft, empathetic pink. "Even in victory, you carry a heavy weight." Vance stopped at a viewport, looking out at the stars. "We almost wiped ourselves out, Alara. 3 times. Nuclear fire, biological plagues, AI uprisings. We spent 2,000 years locked in a gravity well, killing each other over dirt and gods. When we finally united, it wasn't because we wanted to holding hands. It was because we realized that if we didn't stop, there would be no one left. So you built these ships, Alara said. We built them to protect us from ourselves, Vance corrected. And then when we found the Galactic Spur, we saw the same patterns, the same greed, the same bullies. Zarkin was just a reflection of our own past dictators. We hate him because we know him. But the peace was fragile. The Varaxian dominion had fractured, but the core worlds had gone dark. Intelligence reports from the Terran stealth prowlers indicated something disturbing. The remaining Varaxian warlords had retreated to the Dead Zone, a region of space filled with unstable nebulas and ancient ruins. They weren't surrendering. They were changing. Admiral, Commander Riker interrupted, his face pale. Long-range sensors are picking up a massive energy spike in the Varaxian home system. It's not normal technology. It matches the signatures of the precursor artifacts we found on Mars. Vance's blood ran cold. The precursors. The ancient race that had vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind technology that defied physics and drove organic minds insane. They're using the forbidden tech, Vance whispered. The fools, they're trying to ascend. The Varaxians, in their desperation, had interfaced their biological bodies with the dark machines of the dead ancients. They emerged from the Dead Zone not as a fleet of ships, but as a swarm of biomechanical horrors. The ships were alive, pulsing with purple veins, screaming across the psychic spectrum. They didn't just fire plasma, they fired madness. The Second War began. This was not a police action. This was a war for survival. The ascended Varaxians attacked the outlying human colonies. They didn't capture, they consumed. They assimilated entire populations into their biomass. The Terran fleet mobilized, but this time their precision weapons were less effective. The biological hulls of the enemy healed instantly. The gravity shears tore them apart, but the pieces just reassembled. And the psychic scream, the howl, incapacitated human crews, causing hallucinations and terror. The Ethelgard, however, were the key. Their crystalline physiology resonated with the psychic frequencies. They were the natural counter to the howl. We can fight them, Alara told Vance, but we need to be close, we need to be on your ships. It's too dangerous, Vance argued. You are not soldiers. We are not soldiers, Alara agreed. We are the choir, and we will sing the madness away. The final battle took place in the heart of the Dominion, at the event horizon of a black hole where the Ascended had built their nest. The Terran fleet, now carrying Ethelgard choirs on every deck, flew into the dark. The battle was a descent into hell. The Ascended ships lashed out with tendrils of dark energy. Human ships burned. The UNS Valhalla was torn in half by a spatial rift, but the humans held the line. Now, Vance ordered, amplify the choir. The human communications array, the most powerful in the galaxy, broadcast the Ethelgard song. It was a sound of pure mathematical order, a harmony of light. It slammed into the chaotic, screaming minds of the Ascended. The effect was catastrophic for the enemy. The biomechanical horrors convulsed. The ancient technology they had grafted to their bodies rejected the chaotic signals. Ships began to dissolve. The Varaxian warlords, their minds cleared for a split second by the song, realized what they had become. They screamed not in rage, but in horror. All ships focus fire on the central hive, Vance commanded. End their misery. The human fleet unleashed a barrage of antimatter torpedoes. The central mass of the Ascended fleet vanished in a blinding flash of annihilation. The threat was ended. The no-mercy doctrine had been applied, but this time it was an act of mercy to end a corrupted existence. But as the smoke cleared, the sensors on the Nemesis picked up a signal. Not from the Varaxians, from the black hole itself. From the artifact the Varaxians had been trying to activate. It was a message. Thorne and Vance stood together in the science lab, watching the decoder work. The message wasn't a weapon, it was a beacon. The Varaxians, Vance said, reading the translation. They weren't trying to conquer the galaxy because they were greedy. They were trying to build an army because they were terrified. Terrified of what? Thorne asked. Vance pointed to the screen. The message was a warning from the precursors. They are coming back, the devourers from the void. We failed, you must not. The twist hit them hard. The Varaxian aggression, the desperate desire for strength, the madness. It was all a frantic, misguided attempt to prepare for an extragalactic invasion that was centuries overdue. The Varaxians had tried to become monsters to fight monsters. They went about it the wrong way, Thorne said quietly. They tried to do it alone. They tried to enslave the galaxy to save it. And we just destroyed the only other fleet capable of fighting what's coming, Vance said grimly. No, Thorne corrected. We destroyed the sickness, we saved the soldiers. He pulled up a holographic map of the galaxy. The Varaxians who surrendered, the Krell, the Hydraxian, the Ethelgard, and us, we don't build an empire of fear, we build a coalition of trust. We show them the data, we tell them the truth. The vulnerable were the targets, but the vulnerable are now the army. The final scene of the story takes place 10 years later. The Grand Synod has been rebuilt, but it is no longer a place of fear. It is a war room. Humans, Ethelgard, reformed Varaxians, and a dozen other species work side by side. Admiral Vance stands on the bridge of the UNS Terra, a ship 4 times the size of the Nemesis, built with Ethelgard crystal tech and Varaxian armor. She looks out at the edge of the galaxy. The sensors show a shadow moving against the stars. The great enemy is arriving. She is not afraid. She touches her comms. All fleets report in. Ethelgard wing standing by. We are the light. Varaxian redemption fleet standing by. We are the iron. Krell logic nodes synced. We are the mind. Terran command standing by. We are the shield. Vance smiles. It is a smile of a human who knows the odds and doesn't care. This is Admiral Vance to the invading force, she broadcasts into the dark void. You have targeted this galaxy. You have assumed we are prey. You have made a grave calculation error. We are not vulnerable anymore. We are humanity and we brought friends. Weapons free, she whispers. The combined fire of a united galaxy lights up the dark, a blinding testament to the fact that while the vulnerable were the targets had become the weapon. The Earth's fleet showed no mercy to the tyrants, so that they could stand with the free against the end of the world. And in that light, the story ends, not with an ending, but with a beginning of the true war, a war they would win. The narrative closes with a philosophical reflection, the voice of the universe, observing this small spiral galaxy. It notes that in the cosmic calculus, kindness is usually a weakness. Empathy is a flaw. But here in this sector, the humans had proven that empathy was the ultimate force multiplier. By protecting the weak, they had turned the weak into the strong. They had woven a tapestry of steel and glass that could withstand the entropy of the void. The camera pulls back, leaving the bridge, leaving the fleet, leaving the galaxy, until the Milky Way is just a spinning disk of light in the infinite dark. But it is a bright light, a defiant light. The vulnerable were their targets, but they found only gods of their own making.